This episode of Nos Audietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Audietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to...
This is Nos Audietis.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
Save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nico Ladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is good.
Seattle Sounders, the greatest MLS team in history.
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
And Paul McKay says, cheating.
We want to win. Let's see on a Sunday, bro.
Good for Seattle!
Welcome to another edition of Nos Audietis, sponsored by Full Pull Wines, Watson's Counter, and our Substack subscribers. This is episode 388, and we're recording on Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023. I'm your host, Jeremiah Shan. Joining me today is Aaron Campo and our producer, Lickett. Well, it wasn't exactly the result the Sounders were looking for, but considering they had only even claimed a point at RSL once in the past 12 trips to Utah, a 0-0 shutout might not be such a bad thing. Utah has been a rather horrific place for the Sounders to play, and anything that can go wrong usually does. This time, however, it was more of a mundane road draw. That the Sounders also managed to keep a shutout should probably be seen as a bit of a bonus as well. Still, I suspect you're at least a little bit frustrated by this result, Aaron?
A little bit, especially in the context of how the game unfolded. I think that whenever you get a point on the road, you can't be too upset. If you get a point on the road and win most of your games at home, you're doing pretty well. But RSL is very bad. It's a team the Sounders beat handily early in the year. The Sounders have struggled in Utah. That's well known. It used to be that everybody did. And so it was a little easier to stomach when nobody was beating RSL at home, but people are beating RSL at home now. It's not an uncommon thing. And so it does make it a little more frustrating. We were kind of talking about this before the show started. And I think for me, if you ask the question, is this a result that you're going to look back at the end of the year and say, oh, if only we gotten that win at RSL, the whole year would have looked different? I think probably not. I think if you can get a point, you feel okay about it. For me, the frustrating thing was that this wasn't one of those games where the Sounders were playing really well, creating a lot of chances. They were just having to deal with a team that was defending really well or making things difficult for them. The Sounders just didn't play very well. They came out pretty flat. Their key players did not do much to make a difference. I think this was maybe the most quiet game of the year for both Jordan Morris and Nico Ladero. Nobody else was doing a whole lot to create. I thought the defense played pretty well. RSL was similarly pretty toothless. And so you have to feel pretty good about that. But, it was just kind of one of those meh games. And we get them, especially this time of year in MLS, especially when the fixture congestion starts up, where you just kind of want to forget about it. I kind of wish I'd been doing something else on my Saturday night. But, it's not a terrible result. But I think it is completely reasonable to be frustrated by it, by the quality of the performance. And you just got to hope that the next one's a little more interesting.
Yeah, you bring up Nico Ladero, and I think this was sort of the kind of game that I keep hearing people think he's had when he's actually been really good this year. But this was a pretty quiet game from Ladero. I think he had a season low 59 touches. It was only the second time that he didn't have, he had 0 expected goals and 0 expected assists. So he didn't do much to influence the game. I thought Leo Chu had a few bright moments at least. He set up a couple decent chances. Jordan Morris had a couple decent looks. Bear had a couple okay looks. But yeah, it just wasn't. There was some decent looks, but nothing that you're like, oh, you just have to finish that. With maybe the exception, there was a cross from Alex Roldan to Jordan Morris that he looked like he got just enough of his head on to get credit on the XG, but not enough of his head on to actually be a dangerous, to force a save or for it to have almost been a goal. But if he had, gotten a little bit more of it, probably would have been a goal. And so it's just kind of that kind of game, right? Like,
yeah, I think if you are Zaprudering things to that degree to talk about the quality of chances that were created in the game,
right,
you know that it was that kind of game. And one or two games here or there in a season is not that big a deal. And I think that I didn't see anybody really panicking over this one. I think that the general consensus was like, yep, this is one of those games. And so if they're able to bounce back and look a little bit like they have at other points this year, I think that you just kind of chalk it up to being one of those games. Obviously, the injuries are starting to pile up a little bit. There's a lot of games to play in this month. And so that's a little bit of a concern, but they didn't lose. They didn't go out and lose to RSL, right? Like they seem to have kind of shaken off that Timbers loss, which is good. There didn't seem to be too much of a hangover effect there. You got the
defensively, I think you can definitely say they've gotten over that.
Yeah, and I mean, I do kind of wonder if there is a part of this that is just a result of some tactical tweaks to shore up the defense a little bit. Maybe unrelated, but maybe interesting to look at going forward. But yeah, I mean, you get the Open Cup win in the middle of the week. You're coming off an MLS win. You go on the road, you get a point, and it's okay just to not think about it anymore. I mean, I think if this becomes a trend, obviously that's a concern. But we've seen them struggle in isolated games this year. FC Cincinnati was one. They came right back from that one. Timbers game came right back from that one. So as long as they don't make a habit of it, not a big deal. But yeah, I mean, it's ultimately we watch this stuff because it's entertaining, ostensibly, and this game was not that. It was a pretty difficult slog at times, but that's the way it goes.
Yeah, it was a slog. I can definitely attest to that one, and it wasn't without some losses in a sense. João Paulo picked up his 5th yellow card of the season, which means he's going to be out. I suppose you can be of two minds on that. On one hand, maybe it's good for him to get a little bit of rest, even if it's forced rest. And if you can afford to be missing him for any game, you'd like to think at home against Sporting Kansas City would be a good one for him to miss. And then the other one, which was a little more scary, a lot more scary, was Kellen Rowe at first looked like he tore his ACL, and when a 30-something-year-old sort of reserve player suffers a torn ACL, you start to wonder, like, are they going to be able to come back at all? But as it turns out, it's not a torn ACL. He's still probably going to be out 6 to 8 weeks, combined with Nuhu's continued absence. We don't know if he's going to be available or not on Sunday. That extra day of prep they have might come in really handy. But Christian Roldan is still out. We got an update from Brian Schmetzer at training this week that he's they actually have him going to another specialist to see what's going on, why he's still dealing with concussion symptoms. So that one's a little scary because you start to wonder, like, okay, is something even more serious going on here? But yeah, they're going to be shorthanded a little bit. Obviously, Raul Ruidiaz is still out, going to be out for probably a couple more weeks at least. And this is coming into a very, very busy part of the schedule. We'll get into this a bit more, but yeah, they have a ton of games coming up in the next month or so. Basically, going to be playing every other day or twice a week for the next month. And yeah, I mean, it was not the best time to be losing more players.
Definitely not. It's especially because it seems like they're losing them at specific position groups, which is never good. And I think the Sounders' depth is unquestionably very good, but
There's a
when
limit.
there's a limit. There's always a limit, right? Like even at the highest levels, there's a limit, but especially in MLS, there's a limit. And they did pretty well when their depth was tested at forward earlier this year. They had some pretty good success missing Raul and Hebert, but they still had Jordan Morris, and they don't really have that same kind of depth at left back, and so that's definitely a concern. I mean, it's on the one hand, it's exciting that maybe we get a chance to see some of the youngsters, but on the other hand, it's a little concerning because they'd most likely be playing out of position, and it's frustrating that this is happening at the point in time when maybe the Sounders can least afford it. And I think it's especially concerning because I think there's a general consensus that's emerged this year that really it was Christian not being at 100% that probably made the difference down the stretch, and that 100% Christian Roldan is probably enough to get the Sounders into the playoffs. And so to not have him obviously is scary, but it's scary from just the general perspective of his long-term health, his well-being outside of the game of soccer. It's definitely, I'm starting to get concerned about it, because if it's a player that's had multiple concussions in their career, you definitely would expect them to be held out for longer. But Christian, as far as I know, this is his first concussion.
Yeah. And that's part of what led, my understanding is that's sort of what has contributed to the weird sort of timeline associated with this, is that, we haven't really talked, I don't think we've talked about this a ton on the show, but what it seems to have happened is he suffered a concussion, not necessarily from a blow to the head, but some other sort of jostling effect. And he didn't even realize he was dealing with concussion syndromes until later in the week. And so best I can tell, either Thursday night or Friday after, maybe it was like Friday after training, he basically told the team staff, "Hey, I'm dealing with these issues. Should we get this looked at?" And they're like, "Yeah, we do. We need to, put you through concussion protocol." And they discovered that he had suffered some sort of concussion, and so he missed the Portland game. He missed the Minnesota game. He obviously missed the Open Cup game, and now he's missed the RSL game, and who knows, he could miss more games after that. And so hopefully this is not something where he's just sort of like out indefinitely, and because the longer he's out, it feels like the more likely this could be I don't know, I'm maybe jumping to conclusions here, but it feels sort of like you can't help but have some some concerns about what this all means. And it not for nothing, the Sounders have been a lot better when he's on the field this year. They're 5-1-1 in the games he starts, and they are just 1-1 when he doesn't start.
Yeah, and the game against Minnesota was a win and a decent performance, but I wouldn't say one of their best.
No,
right? Like it felt like he was not on the field, and it is. I mean, it is scary. Like concussions are terrifying generally, especially now that we know so much more about them.
Mm-hmm.
But when they don't react relatively predictably, that's when it gets really scary to me, because for most people, you get a concussion, especially if it's your first one, and you kind of know what to expect. And in the cases where it doesn't turn out that way, it can be, like you said, like it could suggest that there's something else going on, which is, very concerning. Obviously, hopefully that's not the case for non-sporting reasons more than sporting reasons, but it's definitely, I think, if we're talking about how it's going to impact the team, it's a big deal. I think it's pretty clearly a big deal just based on the way they've played with him and without him over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and so far the player who seems to be stepping in to replace him uh, I guess there's been a few different ones, but this last week it was Jordan Morris, and and it's not that Jordan Morris is bad on the right, but it does seem like he has a pretty significant. He does seem to be quite a bit better when he's starting on the left or at forward.
Yeah, I think Jordan at forward and also on the left, although I do think I'm increasingly of the opinion that forward is his best position, but he's clearly like an MVP caliber player this year so far, playing on the left or at forward. And on the right wing, he's a pretty good player. Like that to me
Right.
seems right. Like it's like, yeah, he's a guy that's good to have that level of player. And so the difference between those two of like one of the best player in the league and yeah, he's good, I like him, is pretty significant. And so you got to do what you got to do, right? Like you maybe whatever other option there is to play on the right is even worse, because like we've talked about a lot this year, it's about putting the best cohesive team that maximizes the 11 rather than getting guys into their best position to succeed. But when you look like the Sounders did against RSL, maybe it does stand to reason that, well, the best we're going to look is with Jordan on the left or in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm increasingly of that opinion. Like it feels like there's got to be a better option. The problem is that if it's on the left, you're probably dropping Leo Chu. I have to assume, I've never seen him play on the right, and I have to assume that's just completely a non-starter. Because I feel like if it was something that could happen at all, we would have seen it by now. Just because it does seem like Jordan is so much less effective, and it seems pretty clear, I think, to anybody that's watching. But so I have to guess that Leo Chu is just not going to play there.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen him switch to the right in games, but you're right, we've never seen him start on the right, and I can only assume has something to do maybe with defensive responsibilities and things that maybe we don't see as obviously, because it does seem like he's perfectly capable of attacking from the right side and cutting it on his left. And one of the best plays of the game against RSL was him attacking from the right side, nutmegging the defender, and then putting in a cross to Hebert, whose shot was saved. So I would think that's at least a possibility, and who knows, maybe we will see it at some point. But I don't know. I so much of what the Sounders are doing right now seems predicated on Alex Roldan's attacking a bit, like sort of like his ability to overlap, and so maybe there's something to be said about their communication between Alex and Leo that doesn't work right now. So I can't say why he hasn't started on the right. I'm just sort of guessing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does seem like that might be worth some exploring, especially if Christian's going to be out for an extended period, because one of the other things the Sounders have tried is they tried Albert Rusnak out there, and he's been okay, but he was ineffective enough in the first half against Minnesota that they put Obed Vargas in there, and then and I think Rusnak's very good in the center of the park. So you're sort of like, again, robbing Peter to pay Paul a little bit by moving him out there, and then you're looking at other options that there's just not a lot of ideal options out on the right side. So it could be Jordan, and maybe Leo is another one worth trying at some point. Or hell, maybe we see Paul Rothrock called up from the Defiance, and he has been very good for them. So who knows? I suppose stranger things have certainly happened.
Yeah, I mean, if it gets Jordan and Leo on the field in their best positions, and Albert in his best position, maybe that is the way to go. I'm not opposed to it. You never know.
Who knows? Exactly.
I do think that if the choice is between Jordan on the right and Hebert playing at starting, I'm increasingly of the opinion that Jordan should be playing in the center. I love, like, Hebert is great. I love him, but I just, the way Leo and Jordan have looked together this year is just completely, it's until Leo Chu starts performing at a lower level. I just don't see how Hebert has earned the start over him.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. Well, that's probably a good place to call this a segment. We're going to come back, talk a little bit more about the Open Cup game, do a little preview of the Sporting Kansas City game. We'll probably talk a little bit more broadly about this fixture congestion that the Sounders are about to hit. But you're listening to Nos Arietes, and we will be right back. Thanks to Watson's Counter for sponsoring this episode. Located in Ballard, Watson's Counter is your neighborhood specialty coffee shop, brunch spot, and now coffee roaster. Sourcing exclusively high-scoring coffees, Watson's Counter has started their coffee roasting project to showcase amazing coffees grown around the world. Their first featured coffee is the beautifully complex washed Ethiopian Odola. Follow them on Instagram at Watson's Counter to keep up with all the upcoming releases, or check out their website at www.watsonscounter.com. Whether you want to stop by for your daily coffee to go or sit down for delicious Korean-inspired brunch, Watson's Counter has got you covered. Welcome back to Nos Arietes. So let's talk a little bit about this Open Cup game that happened on Wednesday. As you have probably heard, the Sounders won that game 5-4. It ended a 4-game winless run in the Open Cup. That's the longest in Sounders history. And by longest in Sounders history, I mean forever, like going back to the A-League days when they first made their debut in the Open Cup, which I believe was in 1995 was the first tournament they competed in. So yeah, that was a pretty long run of futility for the Sounders. It felt good to get that win, but they made it a lot more interesting than I think they really needed to. They led 2-0, they led 3-1, they led 4-3 really late, ended up needing, and then they led 4-3. I guess 4-3. They led 3-2 in the at the end of regulation, and then 4-3 in overtime, and then ultimately had to settle for a 5-4 win, with the winner coming on like 124th minute Freddie Montero penalty, in which he was cramping up right before taking the penalty, which I just thought was pretty perfect way to end that thing. But it was a lot of fun, a fun game at Starfire. I got to say, I love the 7:00 kickoff. So much preferable to 7:30, because even when you play 30 extra minutes, you get home at a decent time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the Sounders used a lineup that was almost exclusively young players and Defiance players. In a weird kind of turn of events, the Sounders had a starting lineup that was about 4 years younger on average than the USL Championship team they played, San Diego Loyal, who had a bunch of, players that had MLS and other first division experience. So they weren't any slouches, but the Sounders, pretty much did what they needed to do in that game. And I actually thought it was a pretty encouraging performance overall.
Yeah, I think that if you win in the Open Cup, if you win in a knockout competition, you're doing great. I don't really care what the circumstances are. And this is a lineup that the Sounders should expect to win these games in. We've talked about this a lot over the last few years, that there's this perception that playing lineups like this mean that the Sounders aren't taking the competition seriously. And I don't think that's true. I think that competitions like this are why you have rosters the size that you do, and why you sign players to pro contracts that are not quite ready to contribute week in and week out at the MLS level. That's what they're here for, and they've earned those minutes, right? Like the players that started this game that are Defiance players, or that are first team players but not getting a ton of playing time, this is their reward for putting in hard work and training. And you have to do that to motivate players to give them something to work hard for. And they've lost those games because they've played poorly. They haven't lived up to their potential. They almost did it in this one, right? Like they kind of fell apart. I mean, San Diego, I think, I don't want to say they played well. It was a Joe Corona masterclass. I thought he looked like his old self, vintage Joe Corona performance, but otherwise they had a banger of a goal. Some of the worst goalkeeping I've ever seen, and just some Open Cup randomness, right? That made the game happen. But ultimately, Sounders won the game. That's really all you can ask for. And, from here on out, I think the lineups probably get a little closer to the first team gradually, especially now that you're playing an MLS team that probably doesn't have a lot to play for in the league this year. They're not coached by Bruce Arena anymore, so maybe they'll actually take the Open Cup a little more seriously. Probably not, though.
No, I don't know. I do think I will say I agree with you that I think how seriously you take the tournament is much more about a mentality, and it's much more about the way you prepare for it, and less about the lineup. Because I agree with you. If you're gonna have if you're gonna have a 27 player roster and you're not gonna use the Reed Baker Whitings and Ethan Dobelaires and Sota Kitaharas and you go down the list, why are they on the roster?
Yeah.
If you can't use them in these games, then there's no point in having them on you. There's no reason to and I thought there were some really encouraging performances in this game from these types of players. I actually liked a lot what I saw from Sota Kitahara in the central midfield. I liked a ton of what I saw from Reed Baker Whiting at right back. I thought Paul Rothrock did a really good job coming off the bench. He became I believe the first non-first team player to score a first team goal for the Sounders, maybe in their entire history, which was pretty cool. The player who really stood out to me, the one I was most impressed by because of what I had said my expectations were for him, was Cody Baker, who is a 19-year-old homegrown player currently with Defiance. And the Sounders have been pretty high on him, mostly as a right back, a little bit as a center back, but he played left back in this game. I think he'd only started 2 other games at left back. And there's no, he had an absolutely great assist to Rothrock. He wasn't super clean in possession, but he was a lockdown defender. And honestly, I was really impressed by what we saw from him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you and the listeners and God and everybody here. I was on vacation watching this game in my hotel room after I'd been drinking for about 8 hours.
Oh, well, that's a good way to watch it.
Now it's not like I was drinking hard for 8 hours, but I was still drinking for 8 hours. So, my analysis was maybe should be taken with a grain of salt. But there wasn't anyone on the team that stood out to me as not being at this level.
Yes.
And I
agree with you there.
I think that's really, that hasn't always been the case. I think it's fair to say without singling anybody out. And in this game, I thought everybody looked like they belonged. There were mistakes, but like the goal that sent the game to extra time, there's nothing anybody could do about that goal.
No, it's like a 25-yard absolute rocket from a guy who might not score another goal in his career.
Right. I mean, and like the penalty handball, one of those things. I didn't look at that and say, I never want to see Arriaga play again. It's just like weird stuff happens in these games. And, the Sounders scored 5 goals. You got to feel pretty good about that, even though that seriously was one of the things that did come through crystal clear through the beer goggles was that was one of the worst goalkeepers I've ever seen at the professional level playing for San Diego. I legitimately
this is what's crazy about him. He has La Liga starts.
Yeah. Well,
multiple. Did not look like it.
No, did not. And maybe, I mean, look, like I'm sure that there have been Sounders players where people have never seen the Sounders play, saw that one game, had a nightmare and said, oh, how is that guy even a pro? So this is the only time I've seen Koke Vegas play. So maybe this was just an off night. Maybe he had the flu or something. I don't know. But yeah, it was rough. It was rough. But, if you're playing against a bad goalkeeper having a bad night, you might as well score 5 goals.
Yeah.
And they did. And Reed Baker Whiting's goal, as good as the Loyals goal was that sent it to extra time, I thought Baker Whiting's goal was as good, if not better. Absolute thunder bastard. Cutting and just like a really mature sort of like taking the game by the reins and scoring kind of goal, which is pretty good to see for a player that has the promise and I hate to say hype, but the hype that he does, to see him coming up big in a spot like that was really encouraging, I thought.
Yeah, I would agree, and I thought he actually seemed very composed in his post game comments. I would love to see more of him. Frankly, I'm excited to see what he can do in probably more Open Cup games, and I hope they keep. I mean, I hope they keep winning Open Cup games because I'm excited to see these players get more minutes. But the downside to continuing in the Open Cup is that the Sounders are about to enter a stretch of games from between May 7th and June 3rd that they will play 7 games. Basically, they'll play every 2 games a week from that period. And if they win their Open Cup game against the Galaxy, you can actually make that 10 games between May 7th and June 10th. Again, basically playing every 2 games a week. It's going to be, I mean, a lot of soccer coming up here. Open up wide for some soccer, I think is the saying.
Yeah, it's timing's not great. Fortunately, it's all to make way for the Leagues Cup, and I think we can all agree that it's completely worth it, right? So I know we're all just falling all over ourselves excited about that. But yeah, I mean, it's, I guess everybody else kind of has to deal with it too. You can't complain too much about it.
It is a lot of soccer.
It is a lot of soccer. You really just have to hope that guys get healthy. You got to hope that Nuhu gets healthy here shortly. You got to hope that Christian obviously gets healthy. Raul is probably asking for a little bit much at this stage, but you got to hope that Jordan and Hebert stay healthy, and that everybody else does. I mean, it's just Kellen obviously is probably going to be out past June, but
yeah, I think he's out for this whole. My suspicion is he might be out. It sounds like almost best case he might be out until Leagues Cup.
Yeah, and I mean, you can't really do much about it other than hope that guys stay healthy. Who knows what this next month is going to bring? I think that hoping that the Sounders are going to do what they were doing for the first month or two of the season is maybe asking a little bit much considering everything, but I don't think there's any reason to think, unless some kind of disaster strikes, that they can't get through this comfortably, without completely falling apart and falling out of the supporter shield race. But it's probably going to be, I mean, it is going to be a little bit of a grind. And this is, I mean, we've talked all year about the depth, and I do think the Sounders have good depth, but it's pretty clear that this is going to be where it's tested, because even without the injuries that they're dealing with, you have to rotate when you're playing this many games. You have to rotate. You have to, give people who aren't getting a ton of time, you have to start giving them playing time, which, you have to hope that they take that and run with it and use that as motivation to get more playing time after the stretch is over. But yeah, it's going to be, it's going to be interesting. That's for sure. It is way too much soccer. And I hope we don't have to do it again next year, but hey, I feel as good about the Sounders' ability to deal with this as anybody else's in this league. And that's about all you can ask for.
And looking at the schedule, it's I wouldn't say it's easy by any stretch, but it's not quite as imposing. But I think the game against Sporting Kansas City, absolute must win.
Yeah.
This is a team that comes in winless in its first 10 games of the season. They're 0-7-3. If the Sounders, as long as the Sounders don't lose to them, Sporting Kansas City is going to tie the MLS record for most winless games to start a season. And at that point, you really have to consider this the worst start in MLS season. They've only scored 3 goals. They've had 3 red cards. Now, it should be said, they've been pretty competitive. They tied Philadelphia on the road. They lost 2-1 to New England Revolution on the road just a couple weeks ago. So it's not like this is a team incapable of being competitive in this game, but the Sounders absolutely, I think, have to score an early goal and give them no hope, essentially, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that getting into a situation where you can feel pretty confident around minute 50 or so and start making some rotational subs early on, that's I think that would be just what the doctor ordered in this game. It's complicated a little bit because the guys that you would be rotating in will probably be expected to go 90 midweek against the Galaxy, but that's okay. You can go 30 and 90, but you can't go 90, 90, 90, right? So
right.
Just having the any opportunity to take the foot off the gas over this next month is going to be pretty critical. And this is a game where I think the Sounders should come out and step on Casey's neck and put themselves into a position where they can do that. This is, I mean, if you have designs on the supporter shield, if you have designs on being the best team in the league, you need to beat the shit out of teams like Sporting Kansas City. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And they've shown they can do it this year, and they did it in Kansas City. So we know they can. And I frankly kind of expect them to.
Yeah, and part of it also is that the schedule just gets a little trickier after this. Their next league game is at Houston. That's Houston's been pretty good this year, actually. Then they're back home against Austin. That's a game that they should obviously win. But then they're on the road against Vancouver, another team who has been surprisingly good this year. That's going to be on short rest. It's in Vancouver, where they've often struggled. Back home at Red Bulls, another one they should win. At home against San Jose, maybe that's a win. And then you got the Timbers at home, which, that's quite a stretch to end where this kind of crazy stretch with. But there's if they can win their home games during this stretch, they are in absolutely great shape.
Yeah, I think that's really all you can ever ask for, I think, is when your game's at home, especially when they're playing the teams that they are.
Yeah.
This is, in terms of who they're going up against, it's a pretty friendly stretch. Obviously, Houston's been pretty decent, and playing in Houston is always a pain in the ass. Vancouver has been better, and I think than anybody expected. And I think that's a team that the Sounders should expect to be able to beat away from home, but it's a cascading game. You never know. But in general, if you were going to play this many games in this short of a period of time, these are the kind of teams you'd hope to see on there, right? Like when the toughest challenge is Houston, you're not in terrible shape, but the toughest challenge is playing 8 games in 30 days.
Right. It's the accumulation of all these games that could get tough. But I guess let's start with a win at home against Sporting Kansas City. The absolute, again, they got to win this one.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily literally have to win all their home games in this stretch, but this is one of those ones. Geez.
Right.
Just win this thing. Win it, win 3-0, make life easy.
Yeah. Not asking too much.
Feel good about everything and then approach, deal with everything else as it comes.
Yeah.
But all right, well, that's probably a good place to call it. I don't have much else. We'll have a show later in the week where we take your questions. We also have a show later in the week where we're going to talk to Jimmy Mack of No Other Pod, which is a Sporting Kansas City pod. So lots of stuff to look forward to. If you aren't already a subscriber to our Substack, I would urge you to do that. Support independent soccer media. You can become a free subscriber or a paid subscriber. Plans start as cheap as $5 a month or $50 a year. That's nosadietes.substack.com. Of course, thank you to our sponsors, Full Pool Wines and Watson's Counter, who is getting ready to reopen pretty soon. They have a pretty cool location up in Ballard that hopefully we'll be able to talk about a bit. And other than that, I'm Jeremiah O'Shannon signing off for Aaron Campo and Lickett. This is Nos Adietes. Remember, you will never get alone.
Let's win another one!